Hey, good morning. Welcome back to the channel. I'm out here today at the corner of the Tramway Road and Kent Line. And this is the, how do you say that, Delve Farm, which is one of the Kerr farms. And we're here, we are here at what's called Kerr's Corners. And you may not find Kerr's Corners on every map that you find, but it's right here on the corner of Kent Line and Tramway Road. And I'm here with Tom Kerr, Paul Dalton. How are you, Paul?
I'm good,
and Luke Eagleson. How are you, Luke?
Good.
I think Luke was in charge of the signage.
He helped put up the signage this morning.
I think Luke is the only employee of the Kerr's Corner PUC. Would that be right? Anyway, we've got a story to tell today, and thanks to everybody that liked the last story that we did. I like to call it Tall Tales with Tom, and it can be a series if everybody does what they're supposed to. And at the end of this video, there will be something else that everybody has to do. So, Tom, go ahead.
All right, let's walk over to exactly where the Tramway Railroad ran, and we'll start our story.
And while we're doing that, I also want to do a shout out to Michael. I got a message from you there this morning from Hong Kong. It's really nice to get messages from subscribers. And I try to answer a few. I don't get them all answered.
Anyway, we'll start at Kerr's Corner, and this is exactly where the Tramway Railroad ran. And the story sort of starts in around 1850, when all of this land was transferred from the Crown to various farmers. And at the time, very flat land, heavy trees, a lot of white oak, red oak, hard maple, those kinds of trees. And the farms from here toward Dresden, they logged the farms starting around 1850, and they could haul the logs to Dresden or Wallaceburg on sleighs. So a lot of the big trees were taken from this area. But to the north of this, about Kent Line here to the north, it was very hard to take the logs all that way, so a man decided to build a railroad called the Tramway. And he built this railroad, and it ran for 13 years. And it ran from the Sydenham River all the way up north, about 20 miles, almost to the end of Don Township. And Paul will tell you a little more about his reference to where it ran. I'm going to go get here.
All right, Tom. Well, as Tom has mentioned, like as the Tramway Road ran along the east side of, or the Tramway Railway rather, ran along the side of the Tramway Road, it ran up to about what would be lot 28, so each lot's 2,000 feet long, and we're at lot 11 here. So as it ran up, and then it spurred and it went east and west, probably about 11 kilometers each way. So what it did, the idea being that these large trees that were hardwood were harvested. It was much easier to bring them down this railroad. Of course, there'd be no travel on these roads at all back in the days if it were wet or the spring or any time in the fall. So they were able to use the tramway to take the logs down, put them in the river, and were you going to speak about them
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
And the idea being that yes, a lot of the hardwood was harvested for industrialists. I have some ancestors in Dresden that had a hub and spoke factory, where they bent wood for exactly that, sleigh runners, wagon wheels, anything related that way. But a lot went on to Wallsburg. A great majority of the hardwood went on Detroit and was loaded onto ships to be sent to England, which is something that, that's a fairly new development I didn't really realize, but that's exactly what it was, because there was such a great populace of these hardwood trees. So we'll go back to you for a minute, Tom.
Well, anyway, we'll sort of stay on the trees for a minute and go through. The first thing I want to show you is my great-grandfather's log stamp, and it's got a JK, and when you sold a log, you stamped it on the end of the log with the JK, and it was like a brand. It was a registered sign or signature with, I think, the Ontario government. And if a log today washes up in the Sydenham River and it's got that brand on the end of it, my great-grandfather still owns it.
There you go.
But I haven't found any lately. So that's the log stamp, and you won't find many of these around.
So everybody would have one of those?
No, a lot of people didn't have them. I don't know how you identified your log
if you didn't have a log stamp.
Or maybe they paid you for the log and then somebody else put their stamp on it. And when you were selling logs, you sold them with this device, which is called a log rule. And you hold this at the small end of the log, and there's fine print on here for 8 foot, 10 foot, 12 foot, 14 and 16 foot logs, and depending on the width of the log, it tells you how many board feet are in the log. So they would actually pay you for the log before they sawed it based on this device. And as Paul says, they went sometimes locally, but a lot of them went for export into Wallaceburg, and there were clearly bigger sawmills in Wallaceburg than there were in Dresden. But anyway, so we'll go back to the tramway and how it worked, and we'll take a picture. Here is the engine. It was called Old Brock. And Old Brock, if you, the picture comes from this book, which is Landmarks from the Past, which is the story of Dresden, written by Don Spearman, who everybody knew as Gummer. Gummer wrote this book, and this book happens to be autographed by Don because he was a friend of my father's. And the tramway operated for 13 years and was torn up when the logs had all been extracted. And this book says that there was a bunkhouse up at lot 22 that held 100 men. It was a big industry. And the engineer that ran Old Brock is this man, my great uncle, George Kerr, and he's married to a lady named Alice Tackaberry, and she was the sister of the guy that invented the skates. So my great uncle was the engineer, and he ran the train, Old Brock, up and down this road for 13 years of his life. And I think it was a pretty sad, he actually helped build it, and then he helped take it up. They took up the ties and the rails and the engines, and I don't know what they did with them, but off they went. And so that's, and at that point, all of this land had been logged for the good trees. So oaks and I own some really big oaks over here in my woods now. This farm had been logged extensively right here by the railroad, and it was almost clear cut, according to my father. And the trees that grew up after it had been cleared were basswood.
Soft.
And softwood and fast growing. And when my grandfather bought this farm, he paid for most of it by selling basswood bolts. And in those days, there was a factory in Wallaceburg that made baskets, and they made them out of basswood, a really white, soft, and they just cut thin veneer. And to sell a basswood bolt, they cut them 4-foot lengths, loaded them on bobsleighs 2 wide in the winter, and the basswood bolts, 4 feet long, had to have no knots. They had to be in a clear piece of wood, and it had to have a certain diameter on the small end. And you could cut these basswood bolts, and they paid good money for basswood in Wallaceburg, and that's how my grandfather paid for this farm. So those are some of the stories, and it must have been a sad day when they tore up the railroad, because a lot of the neighbors are recorded as getting free rides. You could get a free ride down to the river and walk into Dresden, and they'd have a bit of a schedule. You know, they sort of knew when they were going up and down, and so my great uncle would let people ride for free all the way up and down. It was not only a logging thing, but a kind of a community thing. And so it was pretty sad when they tore it up. And the last item I have is the fireman. The fireman on the old Brock was George's brother, Charles. And Charles became a conductor for the CPR after this was, then he became a Baptist minister, and then he died about a month before the end of the First World War in France, and he's buried in France.
Oh.
Well, anyway, he was the fireman that the 2 brothers that ran the railroad up and down right here. And that's sort of the end of the story. So any questions or?
Well, that's quite a tale, quite a story.
It certainly is.
Well, I never knew, like, with this tramway, I never knew where they come up with the name Tramway Road.
Yeah.
And most of these roads, the name of the road has something to do with local history of some kind.
Right.
You know, like I was in Malham's Bush on the weekend, and you know, it's on Malham's Road.
Yeah.
You know, all these roads have a
history.
Whoever researched it, now I know it as the 5th concession, but anyway.
Well, right, and it became Tramway Road on the recommendation of my father, who attended the meeting. I think he got listened to pretty well, and of course the road over is the Irish School Road. This is Tramway, and Esterville is the other one, and they certainly relate to my father, because my father married a lady who taught school in the Irish school, her first teaching job, and that's where my father met her. Of course, he knew this as Tramway, and of course he went to the Esterville school. So my father had a lot to do with the naming of these roads.
Well, that's good. Well, thanks, Tom, for coming.
Thank you for giving me another tall tale opportunity.
Tall tale from Tom. I just love that idea. And if you like this story, like the other ones that Tom has, what we'd like you to do is subscribe. If we could get 15 subscribers. If we could get 15 subscribers on this video, you'll come back and do another one, Tom?
I would even come back if you get 12 subscribers.
12! Oh.
A dirty dozen.
Okay, so if we get a dozen on this one, Tom will come back and do another story. So thanks for viewing, and we'll catch you on the next one.